I lived in the woods of Baltimore for over a year. Could you imagine that? That's what today's video is about. Before I joined the U.S. Army and many other obstacles in my life, I started out homeless. Ready to go? Let's get it. First, welcome back to the channel. I'm Wayne, the founder of One Sober to Another. In this video, I'm going to tell you a story, and I want you to picture yourself right there with me, living in the woods in Baltimore for a year. When I was 16 or 17, I can't quite remember, I had an argument with my father, and we didn't see eye to eye anyway because, like me, I was an active alcoholic for 23 years, and he was an active alcoholic almost my entire life. So that led us down a road of nothing but combat for the entire time that we knew each other. I won't go into further details on that because that's not what this video is about. And before I get started, thank you to everybody dropping comments and everybody supporting each other within the comments, because I think that is far beyond what I expected from that one video. And I am thrilled that people are finding connections and finding hope where before they thought they were alone. Thank you to those who have subscribed to the channel. And if you haven't, if you like this video, consider subscribing, because we're only as good as what we put out into the universe. And I think that being a unit in recovery will help more people than you know, to include yourself maybe, because I know it helped me. Now back to the story. Okay, so I had those days with my father that just weren't clicking, and they just weren't anything worth talking about, because we always ended up slamming doors, and he always thought that I was up to something. I always knew that he was up to something. And so that relationship went on for a couple years, and it started to spill over to my relationship with my little brother. Now, I don't talk about him too much because he has things of his own going on that I hope that he's working through. But this is what happened in that case. Him and we got into a fight, and we ended up getting physical. And I can remember that I hit him. And when I hit him, it actually caused him to bleed out. And I felt utterly horrible. And I knew in the moment that I was going to get kicked out anyway. So I just decided in my infinite wisdom that I was going to deed him out and I was going to leave. And I knew this girl from high school, and I knew that she was moving to Baltimore, and her and I had a small relationship. And it was definitely not like full-blown love, because I don't think that I was at that age where I could possibly know what that is. And so I decided I was going to follow her to Baltimore. Now, I lived in, where did I live at that time? Laurel, Maryland. And if you know anything about that location, they're considerably further apart from each other than I had in mind. I ended up catching a Greyhound bus to Baltimore, in which I was there under the pretense that her father said, which I doubt, because she's just a teenager just like I am, that I could stay there. And so I started living in their basement, and she would bring me down crackers and things like that. And I thought it was odd, because if your father knew I was here, why would it matter if I go upstairs? So there I was one day, just sleeping away, and it couldn't have been too much longer after that. I was getting kicked in the feet, and I looked up and I saw this behemoth of a person, and he was like, "Young man, you got about 3 seconds to leave my house." And so, me being me and knowing that I'm no good at straight conflict with a grown person, because I was just a scrawny little teenager trying to get by. And now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that life has already happened to me, and that my childhood taught me to retreat and to definitely flee from conflict. What I ended up doing was strapping on my shoes and going to the Walmart right down the road. I had $40 in my pocket. And I decided that I was going to get a tent, and I decided that I was going to get some Chico sticks. And if you don't know what Chico sticks are, they're the center, you could picture it as the center of a Butterfinger, and it's just one long piece. Well, I got a bunch of those because they were about 18 cents each at the time. And I said, okay, I got this stuff. Where do I go from here? I looked around, and you know, if you've ever been to Baltimore, in the inner city, there's not too many places that are savory for a scrawny little person that is trying to make it on their own, unless I want to go into something completely negative in my life, which would happen ultimately. However, comma, pause for this effect. It was at this point where I looked around and I saw that there was a considerable amount of woodline. So I said, I'm pretty savvy. I made it through my childhood. I made it through child abuse. I made it through neglect. I made it through torture in some cases. I made it through violence of all kinds of sorts of natures. And if you're trying to diversify or decipher my language, it's kind of a mix between life. So I ended up going into the woodline. Now, it's winter, and my tent has panels on it. It's a little two-man tent. My tent has panels on it. One is white, and one is bright fluorescent orange. Whoa. Actually, yellow. Sorry, it's yellow. Whoa, you could see that from anywhere on the planet, in the woods, in the wintertime, in the city, in Baltimore. And so I chopped a trail into the woodline, and I set up shop. I probably went about a quarter mile in. Now, there's not much to this tent. It's just a little piece of frame, and I had nothing in it. I had the clothes that I had on, and I had maybe a couple articles that I took from that house. Don't ever tell her that. And I just started doing what I knew best. I knew how to survive. I knew how to get by without anything. So I think I can do this. So it started out pretty simple, and then I started piecing together that I'm gonna need some food, because there's not too much that I'm gonna hunt in this little bit of tree line. Maybe some crawfish out of the creek, I don't know. But I said, you know what, I gotta get a job. Now, one of the things about getting a job is you have to give an address, and in those days, a good physical address meant that you're gonna get your paycheck. Bad physical address meant you're not getting a paycheck. We didn't have these awesome cellular phones. We didn't have, email and all that stuff. Okay, so I knew I had to get a job, and there was a Friendly's restaurant maybe a mile down the road in a mall, which was really cool, because when I applied for the job, when I was getting interviewed, aside from having to give a fake address, the person interviewing me said, you can have food here and you can have it taken out of your paycheck. And, if that's something you want to do on your breaks or whatever, you can do it, and we'll just garnish it out. And I was like, it's a pretty good idea. I can eat for free. I can use their bathroom to tidy up in. And so that's exactly what I did. My occupation was, I was a soda jerk. And if you don't know what a soda jerk is, it's a guy who makes ice cream and milkshakes and things like that. And I just sat in a little service window facing to the inside of the mall. People came by, told me, what kind of ice cream they wanted or what kind of milkshake, and I would hook that up for them. And that was my life for a little while. A little after I started working at the Friendly's restaurant as a soda jerk, an Army recruiter started coming around. Now, I never saw myself as the military type. Ironic, because I did 20 years in it and I retired. So that's an A+ to that recruiter. But I didn't see myself as military. Matter of fact, I saw myself anti-authority. Yeah, because I didn't have much authority growing up. I didn't have examples of strength, and I didn't have examples of courage. I didn't have examples of somebody with values and things like that, that a wholesome person would get and be able to thrive in the military. That was my perspective anyway. He kept coming around and he kept saying things like, have you given any thought to your future? Now, I'm living in a tent in Baltimore in wintertime, and I don't have a house. So I was thinking about it, but I learned something about Army recruiters, folks. I learned that they get a small stipend in order to get people meals so they can talk over options for the military. This was another meal ticket, my friends. So I just dragged this dude along and I said, you know what? Let's meet next week and perhaps we can have dinner down here and we could talk about it more. And he was like, okay, we can do that. And so I just kind of drug that along. Now I was kind of benefiting because I was getting food from the Friendly's restaurant and I was getting food from having meetings with this Army recruiter. And I think he knew I was stringing him along for a little while, but I don't know if he caught on. As time went on, now it's not too much longer. It's still cold season. It's still, horrible conditions to sleep in. As a matter of fact, before I continue that, there was times when I was so cold in this tent, folks, I couldn't feel my feet. I couldn't feel my side. I couldn't feel my fingertips and things like that. And I didn't have a blanket. I just had a coat that I was wrapping myself in. And so what I would do is, I knew that if I found walls that were solid from the floor to the top of the wall, there's no air that's going to go under there. And to me, it seemed like a smart idea to start camping out on walls, because then my body wouldn't get cold from underneath, if that makes sense. And so I started camping out on walls, which was a little dangerous in Baltimore. If you've ever been there in the inner city of Baltimore, it's a little dangerous. And so I started camping out on these walls, and I started, grabbing newspapers and things like that I saw other homeless people doing, and cardboard, and daggone it, it's pretty insulating. It works pretty daggone well. Now, in the midst of all this, some of the people working at the Friendlies, they were doing some extracurricular things on the side. They were young folks, so they like to party at night and everything else. And they were introducing me to things like hash and things like, weed and other kind of drugs. And so I started doing those because I was like, if I do these, then I won't realize that I'm cold. I won't realize that I literally just ran away from home and now I'm living in the inner city in Baltimore in the woods. So I'm going to just push that all down along with that whole childhood thing that I can't seem to shake. And so I started doing that, and the Army recruiter kept coming around. Now, the job at Friendly's was actually pretty good. I didn't have any problems with anybody, and they didn't have any problems with me. I was eating, and I was, interacting with people on a normal basis. I knew this recruiter now on a first name basis, and he was feeding me. And then he figured out that this dude is homeless, and he got savvy with it. And what he decided to do was ask me a question that he knew would stump me. He was like, hey, so I kind of want to come check out, come to your house and give you this Armed Forces Vocational Aptitude Battery, the ASVAB test. And I was like, what's that? And he told me what it was, how it breaks down, what you might be suited for in the military and everything else. And I was like, okay, sure, we can do that. He's like, so what's your address? And it was at that moment I was like, oh, you remember that physical address thing I was talking about? Well, see, we didn't have these smart cellular devices, so you can just plug something in and look it up again later. So I gave him a fake address. I said, 1 Ashland Boulevard. And he was like, all right. He wrote it down, everything else. Somehow, as savvy And I didn't know it at the time, but, military members, especially what I was, we were resourceful. So he was able to figure out between a real physical address, which was 5 Ashland Boulevard, and another physical address, and then kind of intersect them, that there was no one. And so, it's funny, the things that you can recollect and in your sobriety, and the things that you wish you could remember, but you can't. And I know I'm rambling, but it's just interesting to me that this story sticks out as one of the most profound things in my life, because it was at this point I learned what being selfless is. And I didn't think that I would ever be fully selfish, especially in my active alcoholism. I thought through this lesson of selflessness that I would have thrived a little more. But anyway, so I digress. So he found this fake address, and he discovered this fake address was in the woods. And him being the person that he was, he looked around, and guess what he saw? That's right, folks. If you guessed a yellow and white paneled 2-man tent that you could see a quarter mile into the woodline in the wintertime in the inner city of Baltimore, you guessed right. So what he did is he took that tent down, moved further into the tree line, and he set up a tent which to me was as big as a house. Because what I was living in before, like, you literally had to, tuck and roll before you get in there, because you're going to be clammed up and you won't have much space. And, it was actually kind of good for a partial wind barrier, but that's neither here nor there, and not the point. He set up a cot, and he provided a flameless heater and a box of what's called MREs, meals ready to eat. And if you have been a part of the military or done anything concerning the military, you might know what an MRE is and how great it can be if you don't have any food whatsoever. So there I was, walking through the woods, and I had purchased a .45 caliber baby gun. I didn't want to get arrested, folks, while I was homeless in the inner city of Baltimore in the woods in the wintertime. I didn't want to get arrested, so I bought a freaking BB gun. And I was going to my tent one night after work, and my tent was not there. Folks, I lost my daggone mind. I pulled my little .45 caliber BB gun out, and I started running through the woods, just screaming to myself, I got a gun. You better get out of here. Come on, man. Ain't nobody gonna buy that. So after figuring out that nobody was out there, and I was a big dumb idiot running around with a handgun that wasn't a handgun, it was a BB gun, I decided to look around. And when I looked around, I saw an arrow on a tree, and I was like, wow, that's pretty secretive and pretty spooky at the same time. Am I about to meet somebody that I don't want to see? So I decided to follow this arrow, with caution, of course, and my BB gun in hand. I got through the little clearing, and there it was, man, this big old tent, big as a house. And I was elated because I didn't ask this man for anything. Matter of fact, he knew I was stringing him on for some food. And he set up all this stuff for me, and I was blown away. And then I don't know, I didn't feel like I owed him a thank you because I hadn't asked him. And I didn't feel like I was obligated to join the army, but I did feel like perhaps I should hear him out for real. And so I went back to work the following day, happy as hell. And I was doing my soda jerk job, and, being happy as a clam, serving milkshakes and everything else. And here he comes. He comes shining bright, walking down the middle of the mall, and he comes up to my little window where I'm serving ice cream out on the inside, so it faces the inside of the mall. And he's like, "Hey man, how you doing today?" I said, "Well, I'm doing very well. How are you?" And he didn't even mention the fact that he had set all that up. He didn't mention it. And I was actually real blown away by that. And then he said, "Hey, do you wanna come, take the test maybe?" And so I was like, "Okay, yeah, sure, why not?" Because I felt a little obligated just to do him that much, because he had done me a solid by setting me up. And so I did this, and I got to stay in a hotel the night before. And I was in heaven, because I hadn't been in the house since I left that girl's house and lived in the woods. So I was on cloud nine, man, and I was pretty blown away by what was happening from my childhood all the way up to the conflict with my brother and my father, to living in the woods, well, to following this girl, to living in the woods, and going from working at Friendly's as a soda jerk to now staying in a hotel after taking this test for the United States Army. I said, man, perhaps I do have a little potential. And then I was like, nope, I don't. I don't. I remember the childhood. I remember the bullshit. I remember that you're nothing, that you don't have value. I remember being punched in the ribs. I remember being dragged down the street by my hair. I remember watching my father choose alcohol over me. I remember my aunt getting murdered. I remember all these things. And that told me that I don't have value, and that he's a piece of crap for trying to give me false hope. That's what happened in my mind. So I went back to the woods. I left the hotel, and I tore down everything. I just destroyed it, and I left. And I went to Gaithersburg, Maryland, and I started hanging out with a friend of mine, and I started doing coke, and I started drinking again. And my life just went backwards 2 years. Insanity. So I did this for another 2 years, folks, and I hope that I'm not talking to just a blank camera. I did this for another 2 years. And I'm going to tell you, I was sad, I was lonely, I felt worthless. And so I decided that I was going to join the United States Army. And I went down to the local recruiting station. I told them, look, I don't care what the job is, I don't care what the money is, and I don't care where it is. Just get me in. Here's my ASVAB score, boom. If you need anything else from me, just let me know. Within, I don't know, I think it was 7 weeks, I was in the United States Army. I was in boots, and I was doing daggone well. Now, graduation was getting ready to round the corner. I decided to call that staff sergeant from way back when that I destroyed his tent. And I said, hey, this is Wayne. And he hung up. I was like, wow. That's how you start life, man. That's how you start adulthood, is disappointing other people. I felt horrible. I felt sad again. I felt lonely again. I felt like I was worthless once more. So, we got a couple passes. I got drunk as hell. I destroyed the hotel rooms, just like the behavior before with the tent. I almost got kicked out of the Army in basic training. Boy, oh boy. And I said again, why did they have to give me false hope? All the way back to that childhood, folks. And then it all comes back. And then I try to stick it out one more time. I say, nope, I'm graduating. And so that's what I do. I graduated basic training. I started my military career. At my basic training graduation, folks, guess who was there? That's right. That staff sergeant from way back when that I destroyed his tent, that gave me chance after chance, knowing that I was stringing him along, through his selflessness, got me to take the test for the United States Army. I showed him no gratitude. I tried to call him. He hung up, but he still showed up, folks. And that's what I do today here on One Sober to Another. So I show up for folks like you, and I show up for me, and I show up for my son. That story gave me goosebumpies. Life is a garden, folks. Dig it. I'm going to see you in the next one.